using confidential information to place bets. And Felicity Kendall has paid tribute to Dame Penelope Keith following her death, describing her as a comic genius. Dame Penelope's family say she died peacefully while living with cancer at the age of 86. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 23 points at 10,484. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.15. LBC weather tonight: rain spreads across the north, heavy in places, staying mostly dry in the south, a low of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Last week I suggested that the Andy Burnham plan for Britain sounded like a gentle revolution. Listening to him this morning, it still did.
Westminster hasn't been working for people, and it hasn't been working for a very long time. In fact, it is broken. My generation of politicians, including me, must take responsibility. We haven't been good enough. The whole country suffers when the regions and nations are not meeting their potential, and Londoners are left with an overheated economy and an overcrowded housing market. It is actually bad for national government too, because we will never get the growth up to the level Britain needs unless every single postcode in the land is set up to contribute to it. To make it happen, we will bring about the biggest rebalancing of power our country has seen. Now get this. Number 10 North will be the nerve centre of a rewired Britain. So, working with local areas, Number 10 North will oversee the biggest council house building programme since the post-war period.
Things will go wrong. Words are cheap, although they're important. Actions are much more expensive. And I don't see, for instance, where the money is going to come from for the biggest council housing building programme since the war. Great idea, though I think it is. Overall, however, the notion of Number 10 North to drive a national renaissance and the dramatic shift of power and resources to Britain's once great but now neglected towns and cities is thinking on the scale that we need. And when Burnham talked about the need to change politics and Westminster being broken and the need to reach out across parties collaboratively so there's more problem solving than point scoring, and indeed the need to let members of Parliament be authentically themselves without cracking the whip over them all the time, I think the vast majority of people will agree. It was just unfortunate that the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, just before Burnham had spoken about reaching out to other parties, launched an ill-judged personal attack on Ed Miliband and predicted a summer of chaos. The right-wing attack media is already going at Burnham full pelt. The messiah without a mandate, the victor of a ruthless coup. Well, he won the vote in Makerfield, and the party he will lead in Westminster won a general election 2 years ago, but no doubt he will give his critics another election at a time of his choosing, not theirs. And as for the bloodless coup, anything the Tories ever achieved, today Andy Burnham made Britain some very big promises. He offered us change, and he offered us hope. I'm not overexcited, or I hope naive, but I feel a quiet sense of optimism. Let's all, at the very least, give the man a chance. Let's hear first from Polly Billington, the Labour MP for East Thanet, former advisor to Ed Miliband and vice chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Did she think Burnham will give MPs more of a chance to be themselves and speak up for their communities?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we all understand that fundamentally, I'm only an MP because I stood on a Labour ticket. I might think I'm brilliant, but I certainly know that I wouldn't be able to get elected just on my own, like vote for Polly, that's enough. That's just not how most politics works. And coming together on a platform, a shared platform and shared values also means we have some collective responsibility. So I do hope that we're able to have the conversations, that we can stay united as a party, and that those conversations create a kind of consensus about the direction of travel. And that's really where some of the things have broken down most recently because it's been a bit brittle. It's like you're my way or the highway. And that has ended up with people who have been extremely thoughtful and extremely constructive in how they've wanted to stand up for their communities, have ended up on the wrong side of a pretty brutal regime. It doesn't need to be like that. When I speak up for coastal communities, I'm not just speaking up for Thanet, I'm speaking up for thousands of people who live within 5 kilometres of the coast who deserve to have a number of people in Westminster speaking up for them because we understand it. That's the case, but you need to make sure that Whitehall and the decision makers are responsive to that. And I think that's what Andy's talking about.
You're vice chair of the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party. One of the big issues coming up, obviously, quite soon, and Andy Burnham's been very clear about this, is welfare reform again.
Yeah.
Now, this time round, let's see, but perhaps after the recent report and what other people have said, the argument will have been made before the vote is taken, which didn't happen last time. Do you think that's an example where Labour MPs are going to have to show more discipline, perhaps, though?
Well, I mean, we actually, those of us who managed to secure the U-turn were extremely disciplined. So disciplined that they didn't notice that we were coming.
OK, disciplined in favour of the Labour government, then?
Well, actually, disciplined in favour of our values and the reasons why we stood. And that was partly because, as you say, the argument was not made. I think what's been brilliant about what has happened over the last few weeks and months is Pat McFadden has been making the case for how we need to be able to change things. And it has been absolutely in response to conversations that he's had with colleagues who want to be able to overturn this completely moral scar on our nation. I've got 12.5% of 18 to 24-year-olds who live in East Thanet are not in work or education or training. Now, that is a moral outrage. I want to change it. Pat McFadden wants to change it. Andy wants to change it. Let's make sure that we establish a programme that, broadly speaking, we can all sign up to. There's always going to be differences of opinion. You don't always win every argument. That's what politics is about. But we should be able to get to something that we all, broadly speaking, agree with.
Talking about differences of opinion, the other side of what he was saying is that he wants to work more collaboratively, including with other parties, to reach out. Now, there wasn't a terribly collaborative speech from the leader of the Conservative Party this morning. Nonetheless, do you think Labour MPs are actually going to be able to do that? I mean, I go back to all the famous sayings about, lower than scum and never kissed a Tory and all the rest of it. This may be quite difficult for a lot of people on your side to actually contemplate.
Well, we're tribal people, and we're probably a little bit more tribal than the average. Otherwise, we wouldn't put up with the kind of things that we put up with in order to be able to do this. And we do have a clear view about how we want the world to be and how we want to be able to achieve things in the country. But there are some really big challenges facing the country that probably do require some cross-party consensus. I've been really depressed by the breakdown of the cross-party consensus about tackling climate change, and we need to be able to re-establish that. But we've got external and internal threats to our democracy from Russia, from the tech bros, from AI and so forth, that we really need to be able to establish some really important agreements about how we will go forward so that we don't have a switch back in policy, that we can say these are the things that, broadly speaking, every Brit wants to happen and that we need to be able to tackle. And also that involves the democratic resilience too, because we've seen our democracy undermined as well as our national security. So if you're talking about things like establishing consensus on defence, establishing consensus on our democratic values and them not being undermined by foreign influence, for example, or the toxifying of our conversation from social media, those are things we should be able to establish a consensus about because they are too great. What I've noticed is I've been talking to the PLP in order to be able to gauge their feelings, and partly in my role as vice chair, and there is both anxiety and optimism. Anxiety because of the situation we find ourselves in the world with those external threats of all kinds, including the energy crisis, the climate crisis, and the threats from particular hostile powers. And that optimism, because we know as a country we could be so much better than we are being. And that's about how we build up our own ability to be able to really harness the talents and potential of everyone, not just say, oh, I know what, we'll bung some money in that big city over there because we know that the money grows there. Actually, it can grow in Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate. It can grow in places in the middle of Lancashire. It can grow in the middle of the Midlands. These things, and indeed in Cornwall, we need to acknowledge that we need a strategy to grow everywhere.
Polly, you were quite close to Ed Miliband for a long time. Andy Burnham was keeping his cards very close to his chest about the future cabinet at the moment. Do you think there is any threat to Ed Miliband's net zero agenda in what's coming?
If there were, I think that would be quite foolish. I actually think that Andy and Ed would be a pretty formidable combination, because Andy has got a very clear vision about how he wants the country to be, and Ed has got a very, very strong track record in being able to take on some of the Treasury orthodoxies that have contributed to the doom loop that we've been in some way, shape or form, since Gordon Brown made some significant corrections to the economy after the global financial crash. It's been really difficult to recover from that, and that means that our living standards have been static pretty much for almost 2 decades. If you've got somebody who knows how to tackle the Treasury, and Ed's got that, it's got a long track record in that, with a clear an alignment with the Prime Minister, that is the kind of combination
that could be very powerful. Be a really valuable member of that cabinet. So what's your view?
Well, do you know what? I don't really need to be organising or advocating for a reunion of the demonised football club from the mid-1990s, right? I don't do the same things I did in the middle of the 1990s, and I don't think that the boys need to either. We need less lads, and more diversity. The world has moved on significantly from the mid-1990s. We have an extremely talented Parliamentary Labour Party with more than 400 members. An enormous number of those have got a lot of knowledge and experience and understanding of foreign affairs. I'm not going to name anyone, but I do think we need to be making sure that we've got diversity at the top of government and a recognition of the expertise, enthusiasms and experience of the breadth and depth of the PLP.
It's a big, big moment. Polly Billington, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. And listening to that, the journalist who perhaps knows Andy Burnham better than any other, Jen Williams, the Northern correspondent at the Financial Times, who joins us from Manchester. Jen, thanks very much for this. Can I start by asking you about Andy Burnham personally? Because Number 10 is a much tougher, less forgiving place than being Mayor of Manchester. He's under much more scrutiny. He's been attacked this morning already for not taking questions from journalists. Is he tough enough? Does he really know what he's getting into?
Well, he has been in government before. And he was also, in Westminster previously when Labour were in opposition. So it isn't as though he's completely unaware of what the Westminster kind of ecosystem is like. But it's true to say that he has been out of it for nearly 10 years. And he hasn't had the kind of constant barrage of scrutiny and questions from the press, and also, frankly, in national politics, you get more bad faith attacks than you do when you're on the ground.
Absolutely,
being a mayor. So I don't know. I think for the time being, while the wind is in his sails, then I think he will he'll sail on for the time being. When the going gets tough, we shall see, because it's been nearly a decade since he's had to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was a very, very interesting speech today, very well put together, and in some ways quite inspiring. But it didn't really have any detail about costings, detailed policies, some of the big challenges and dilemmas ahead of him. Do you think that, behind the social media videos and the bonhomie and all the rest of it, there is a kind of hard-edged policy conversation getting going that will produce quite quick results?
I think they're building the plane in midair to some extent, aren't they? So what you saw today actually was, this is not intended as a criticism, but if you have followed what he has said as mayor, if you follow what the other mayors have said, and if you follow what he said on the campaign trail in Makerfield, it was a lot of it was a rerun of those greatest hits. A lot of the arguments were very familiar in terms of the kind of policy areas that he would want to focus on, both through devolution and more broadly, going back years in some cases. So it's sort of it was a strange feeling to be stood in a room in Manchester where I've seen him speak before, except this time the context about similar themes. It's just that this time the context is completely different because he's going into Number 10 and people are poring over every word. You could also argue that some of that stuff is it is continuity Starmer, and that isn't entirely intended as a criticism, because Labour were elected on a manifesto, so there's probably only so far that you can deviate from that without causing yourself some problems. But I think the big play that he was making today was around this idea that you can do a rewiring of the state, and part of what you do is put part of number 10 in the north. And I thought one of the interesting things for me in the speech was the fact that the four things that he said that number 10 in the north would be presiding over appear to me to be his big domestic policy priorities. So we're talking about council house building, public control of utilities, and so on.
Jen, I'm trying to envisage what number 10 North is going to look and feel like. Are you expecting literally a big hub of a building where the new Prime Minister will spend a lot of the week surrounded by senior officials, actually a kind of, a throbbing electrical heart of government? Or is it just going to be a name for a nameplate on his house? What's it going to feel like, do you think?
I don't think it's just going to be a nameplate on his house. There are already ministerial bases in the north, and in fact, I think Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has on occasions come under criticism for sort of spending too much time in her Manchester base. Well, I would expect that there would be some kind of tangible relocation, including various sort of people that have worked with him closely in Manchester as part of that. And I think some of those names are in the process of emerging. Exactly what that looks like, we don't yet know. And I think, an awful lot of devil will be in the detail, which will then determine how actually radical that is, because there were big words applied by Andy Burnham in that speech today in terms of his radicalism. What was not in the speech, as you say, is any detail around how things would be paid for. If you're going to go big on council house building, which a lot of people will agree needs to happen, well, the money for that has to come from somewhere. You don't yet have the growth up front to easily pay for that. So you're likely to start getting into trade-offs. We don't know what those trade-offs are. It's no coincidence that he didn't take questions at the end of his speech today, because he would have been asked repeatedly who his Chancellor was going to be and how he was going to pay for all of this stuff. So to come back to the point about it being built in midair, I think some of it is being built in midair at the moment, but it will obviously have to be done fairly quickly.
Jen Williams, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. Now, we've discussed what was in Burnham's speech this morning, but how have the other parties been reacting? And the journalists not allowed to ask any questions? I'll be finding out from LBC's political editor Natasha Clark, who is in Manchester. Time now, 6:18.
This is LBC.
Across social media.
Yes, that's right, Andrew. And obviously, Andy Burnham's got a really warm reception in the room. And obviously, as you were just talking about with Jen, he didn't take any media questions, so he didn't get to face the full wrath of the Westminster lobby today. But of course, party leaders down here in Westminster have been having their say. Here is the reaction of Kemi Badenoch and the Reform leader, Nigel Farage.
Britain is heading for a summer of chaos. We have a caretaker Prime Minister, barely in office, definitely not in power. All major policy and spending decisions have been put on hold.
Has devolution in London, with Mayor Sadiq Khan, made London streets safer? No. Has devolution in Wales given them a better NHS or education? No, they're the worst in the country. And has devolution in Scotland cleaned up Scottish politics? Well, I think the recent jailing of one of the former bosses of the SNP would say no.
That was Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch speaking earlier. And I think we are going to hear this narrative from the opposition parties all summer, this idea that things aren't moving in Whitehall, the idea that the Labour Party is now creating this chaos. But equally, I spoke to people in the room earlier, Andrew, who were obviously very welcoming of Andy Burnham's speech. Obviously, they're all his allies. People that weren't in the room, however, any of the potential wannabe chancellors, no sign of Shabana Mahmood, Ed Miliband or Wes Streeting at all. But here was some of the more positive reaction from Burnham allies in the room. The mayoral hopeful, Bev Craig, and mayors Tracy Brabin and Kim McGuinness.
You know, somebody who thinks about what the problem is now and plans for the future at the same time. And in my lifetime, I've not really seen politicians that have talked about doing both.
A mayor with that experience that then can take that to the heart of government and to, as he wants to do, provide a circuit breaker and to rewire politics across the country.
Although this will be in Manchester, it's not about Manchester. It's about that regional approach and putting the stake in the ground and saying these places are important.
So very happy people were there, but less happy the journalists who'd gone all the way up to ask questions and had to tail back down again, having failed to get the opportunity. How much of a mistake do you think it might be to irritate the Westminster lobby so early?
Yes, I think it's a small mistake, Andrew. But, equally, I think Andy Burnham's team will say, look, we will come forward, we will do more press conferences, we will do more speeches, he will talk to the media. But I do think that at a time where you are fighting off allegations that you are avoiding the country, that you are essentially saying, I don't need a general election, I'm going to run with my mandate, which obviously I've not earned from the electorate. I think there are many people, and there are people close to Andy Burnham, that think that it would be a good job if he did a little bit more talking to the country. He's out and about talking to voters every day. Why doesn't he come on the media and make that message directly to journalists? That is a question that many people are saying. But yes, we hope to speak to Mr. Burnham, your mate, Andrew, in the very near future.
Perhaps he doesn't like us as much as we'd hoped.
Potentially.
Natasha, thank you very much. Now then, one of the biggest issues for the incoming Prime Minister was the number of young people with mental health problems, many of them living on benefits outside the workforce. The Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza, has uncovered some truly shocking statistics about what's going on, and she joined me a little earlier.
So I've been collecting this data for 5 years in my term. The numbers have doubled. We now have more than 1 million children been referred to children's mental health services. That's 1 in 10 children. Really shocking. And the numbers don't stop there. Not only is it double the numbers from 2018, the waiting times are getting longer too. So we've got 60,000 children who have waited 2 years or more to even get their appointment. And a third of the children still haven't been seen. So it's not just shocking, I think it's crisis.
Why do you think it's happening?
So I think there are a couple of answers to that. Like there's one side in which I'd say, look, we can see there's a huge rise in the number of children presenting with suspected autism. I wonder if they should even be in children's mental health services.
I was going to ask about that. Do you think there's something contagious happening online where people are seeing other children, think that's me too, and it's just spreading because of that?
So look, that's about a label, isn't it? And I mean, I'm on the Department for Health Prevalence Review, and we're looking at this. And what I would say there is this children's mental health pathway isn't the right place for those children. For children who've got suspected autism, they should really be dealt with early, supported early. It's a behavioural thing. So actually we should be looking at how can we help you, not what's wrong with you. But the distress is real. The other group that's huge are children with anxiety, presenting with anxiety. And that's where I think we've got some bigger questions to answer as a society.
Well, let's talk about the bigger questions.
OK, so from my perspective, the 18-year-olds now, were 12 during lockdown. This is the lockdown generation now. And I think the thing we should have done straight after lockdown is really invest in the children, get them back to school, get them playing out, get them happy. They'd had a pretty upsetting time. Yeah, a really upsetting time. And in fact, that is the answer to good mental health, to be at school, to be with your friends, to play out. That's the answer. But also add to that cost of living shock. So children, more poorer children than children from more affluent families are being referred. And when I talk to children around the country, it's always biggest worries, money, will I get a job? And the third thing is social media. Now, in Westminster, we have this big debate, should we ban it, should we not? But actually, when I talk to children across the country, they're saying we're spending hours on it. It's making us feel upset. We're trying to cut down. We don't know how to get off it. And all this stuff is beaming in instead of doing the things we talked about a minute ago, playing out and having a healthy life.
So you, I'm sure, back the social media ban the current government or the current Prime Minister has proposed.
Well, I want that and more. I've been doing the screen time guidance for 0 to 5s that the government just put out, and I'm now looking at 5s to 16s. And I'm, every young person I ask when I say, should I ban social media? Should we ban social media? They say no. But when I ask them, should the adults protect you from seeing the things you're seeing, from spending 6 hours online, from from these addictive algorithms, they say yes. So, look, I do back it. I think we could reframe it in language that was a bit more helpful, like we're going to protect the children from these things. But yeah.
And just jumping slightly out of your cohort, as it were, let's talk about children, young people who leave school, leave education with mental health problems and then don't go into work. Andy Burnham has made a point in his speech this morning of transferring the power to help them, as it were, away from central government and to local mayors and local communities, because he argues they know where the jobs are and they can better help people into work. What did you think of his speech?
So, look, I've had a first look at it. The first thing I want to say, as a Scunthorpe steelworker's daughter, I was really pleased to see him mention Scunthorpe and the places that have been left behind. And this is exactly what we're talking about. What we need is for the young people there is, genuine investment by employers. We really need, local solutions. I come from a town that had a proud, industry that kept this country wealthy. We need to get that back again. We need to get that.
So you like the reindustrialisation agenda as well?
I like the reindustrialisation, but I also like the hope for the young people. I have just gone from Carlisle. I walked Hadrian's Wall with 60 scouts. I've been in Carlisle. I've been in Preston. I've been in Blackburn. I'm heading over to Scunthorpe and Grimsby soon. I've been in Birmingham. And the kids are saying to me, we want great jobs. It would be great if we could have them here. They're worried that AI are taking away the entry-level jobs. And they want to get out their bedrooms. They want to do things. We need to be thinking about proper vocational education, proper work experience. Yes, we want all children to have the opportunity to learn read the best that's been written and said, of course. But alongside that, we can have fantastic skills development that will allow them to get jobs and get the employers involved. And I absolutely put it to you that local is the only way. From what I've seen, local is the only way.
Well, it's certainly the theme of the day. Rachel, I have to ask you just to talk to those people listening to this who will be saying, young people, autism, anxiety, stress, get over yourselves. You're the snowflake generation. We rolled up our sleeves and got back to work. So should you.
So I have seen no lack of ambition in the million children I've talked to. They want great jobs. They want to get out there. And don't forget, this is the generation that gave up their own freedom. They allowed themselves to be locked in their houses, in their bedrooms, not to see their grandparents, not to see each other, and that caused half of these problems. And they did it for us. They did it for us because COVID didn't really affect them. So, yes, I sometimes look at the way the new generation talk about things like mental health and want to describe and define themselves online with neurodevelopmental things. And I roll my eyes. But weren't we the same in our own ways, but just different ways when we were young?
We just didn't know the word neurodiverse.
We didn't know the word. But what I would say is there is no lack of talent. There is no lack of ambition. We need a government that backs children and backs young families, not one that blocks them. I want to see incentives for employers to employ young people. I want to see, us getting behind these young people and getting them into jobs. And I want an education system that gives them the opportunities. And I want to see Scunthorpe back leading this country again.
Absolutely. Do you think Rachel Reeves has made it harder for employers to get young people into work?
So what I do see, I try to stay out of things that are not directly about children. But what I do see are children and young people who are just at that stage where they need work experience, they need entry-level jobs. It's not just government policy, but government policy needs to do everything it can do to help. I met a little girl the other day in Preston, and she said to me, my big desire is to be an author. I really want to write. And she said, but, the AI can write a book in 10 minutes, so I don't know if I'm going to bother. And
you tried to read the book that AI has written is the answer.
But I think what we're seeing with this generation is a great love and desire of the digital, and they can see the opportunity of AI, but it is making, putting some obstacles in the way of those first early leaps. Like, you don't see young reporters anymore, do you? AI are doing it all. All those entry-level jobs have been taken up. So I think this is where government could intervene, should intervene, make it easier for employers and better for employers to be able to employ young people. I got my first job on Scunthorpe Market, £10 a day. I worked from the age of 15 right the way through, and those were the things that shaped me and made me, be able to launch my teaching career, be a head teacher. We need to give opportunities, and the kids are crying out for the opportunities.
Dame Rachel D'Souza, at the very end of the period where you could be interviewed by Andrew Marr rather than by an AI avatar, thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up, we'll hear from one of the mayors hoping for more powers from a Burnham number 10. What changes does he want to see at Westminster? Time now, 6:33, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Andy Burnham has been setting out his plans to move power from Whitehall if he becomes the next Prime Minister. He's made his first major speech since returning to Westminster, which included moving some number 10 operations to Manchester. Resident doctors in England have voted to accept an offer to improve pay and working conditions, ending a year of strike action. It involves an average 6.6% pay uplift and will be implemented by next April. And a close aide to former PM Rishi Sunak has pleaded guilty to gambling on the date of the 2024 general election. 41-year-old Craig Williams used to be the Tory MP for Montgomeryshire and Cardiff North. LBC weather. Tonight, rain spreads across the north, heavy in places, staying mostly dry in the south, a low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC.
Plan itself, because there are rumours that it is finally coming very very soon.
Yes, we expect to know more about the Defence Investment Plan in a big way very soon. There are some details that have been floating around. We understand that the current Defence Secretary plans on replacing warships with 6 new hybrid vessels, which were equipped with drones. And we've also seen reports that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is offering an extra £1 billion for the Defence Investment Plan, which would bring it to roughly £15 billion. But this isn't close to the £28 billion black hole that military bosses have warned exists.
So of all the problems that Prime Minister Burnham, when he gets there, will find on his desk in number 10, defence is still going to be one of the big ones.
Defence is going to be incredibly high. We shouldn't think at all that the Defence Investment Plan landing will stop people saying that it is an underfunded area, that it doesn't need more money, that there doesn't need to be more investment. And Andy Burnham is frankly just going to have to pick up the questions that Keir Starmer is currently being asked.
So lots of problems, but one problem resolved this afternoon.
The BMA have indeed accepted the government's pay deal for junior doctors. I think all listeners will be incredibly well aware that junior doctors and the government have been in a long-running dispute which has seen a number of strikes that have been very disruptive, that have cost the NHS quite a lot of money, that have seen people miss appointments, miss surgeries. But James Murray, the current health secretary, who's only been in post for 5 weeks, has indeed got the deal over the line. People close to him very keen to press that means he's doing just a fantastic job. Who'd have thought it? And Keir Starmer, indeed, as well as James Murray, will be wiping his brow that this can be added to his legacy as he leaves office.
Well, I saw the Prime Minister actually tweeting about this earlier on. He's jumped into this story as well. He's actually had quite a good few days, actually. I mean, bad few days, I'm sure, when he contemplates what's happened to him. But in terms of policy changes, he hasn't done so badly.
There's an interesting question if I'm trying to be cheeky when I'm talking to ministers, where I say you're actually managing to do quite a lot in the end of days of this administration. Doesn't that mean that you could have done that,
without all of this?
Since you came into number 10. And there is a lot of people sheepishly goes, no, this is a very bittersweet time. This is very annoying because, yes, we could have done all of this without all of this fuss.
The simple answer to that is it's too late now.
It is.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed for that, because listening to this was Dr. Jack Fletcher, chair of the Resident Doctors Committee at the BMA. Dr. Fletcher, thanks very much indeed for joining us. It was, 47% thereabouts in favour, so not overwhelming. Is this the end of it now?
So I think we've been really clear. We've had 33,000 resident doctors share their views on this latest offer from the government. We were clear that when we first negotiated with the government that we were prepared to negotiate and we were prepared to ask members what they thought were a democratic union. We did that, and we've had 53% of those 33,000 doctors say that they think this is sufficient progress. What I would say is, though, this is very much a journey. Our pay remains down compared to what it was in 2008. This represents the next step in that journey, and I'm really hopeful that the peer review body next year will recommend something that takes us further on that journey towards pay restoration. However, what I would say is that in addition to that, there are 4,500 jobs that are being added to the jobs market for doctors, because we currently have this absurd situation where resident doctors in literally just a few weeks' time might not be able to find work. And we hope that this deal, given some of those jobs are going to be put out almost immediately to recruitment, will go some way to helping that.
It is an absurd situation, you're quite right. But looking at the 6% or so that you have accepted, it's a long way short of what you were asking for. You had a big increase last year. Is the job situation, the putting the extra jobs on the table, was that what you think persuaded your members to accept?
So I think fundamentally, obviously, we've had 33,000 people give their voice and share their voice and speak up, and 53% of them voted and said actually that this is a credible offer and this does represent sufficient progress towards that. I just want to be clear that nobody asked for anything in one go. We did a deal with the government almost 2 years ago now, which started the reversal of that journey. Resident doctors have seen some of the largest pay erosion in the public sector. We made a first step towards that, and now this is a second step. And all we're saying to the government is let's continue that journey. Let's make sure that we are moving towards restoring that lost value of pay. Obviously, the jobs certainly will hopefully go some way to fixing this ridiculous jobs crisis. And hopefully, if the peer review body next year does continue to make progress, then the NHS doesn't need to see any more industrial action. But to be clear, if that falls short, then regrettably, we reserve the right to re-enter.
Do it again. Okay. You had, I think it's fair to say, a tense relationship with the previous Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who left the government. Have you noticed a change with James Murray, and has that helped get this deal over the line?
So we've always been clear we'll negotiate with anyone, whether they are the previous administration, which was Conservative, the previous Health Secretary, the current Health Secretary, and what I assume is going to be a new Health Secretary in a few weeks' time, or a new Prime Minister. We will negotiate with anyone. The key thing that I'm here to do is make sure that actually patients who are going to phone up their GPs tomorrow morning or in 10 months' time potentially aren't facing hold music because we have a lack of doctors, because they are leaving because they either can't find jobs or feel undervalued. We hope that this pay deal and this jobs deal goes some way to preventing that. But just to be clear, we need to see that progress continue, and we hope to see that progress continue, but we'll negotiate with anyone regardless of who it is.
Dr. Jack Fletcher of the BMA, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now back to our top story. The Andy Burnham vision will work or fail depending on how successfully communities and directly elected mayors up and down the country grab new powers and new money and change their areas. One of them is Oliver Coppard, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, and he's with me now. Mr. Coppard, thanks for joining LBC. You represent an area which has suffered a lot from deindustrialisation, so you're presumably pleased to hear what Andy Burnham's been saying about that. But what in practical terms do you think it might mean for you?
So in South Yorkshire, you're right, we've seen a load of deindustrialisation from the pits to the steelworks. And since the 1980s, what we've been trying to do is find a new path for South Yorkshire. Now, in no small part, we found that in things like advanced manufacturing, in digital, in health tech, and a bunch of other things besides. So what I'd like to see from Andy, and what I'd like to see when he puts sort of meat on the bone, essentially, is his support, the government support for those sorts of industries, the things that we're doing here in South Yorkshire to attract investment, supercharged by the government. So that's what I'm looking for, and I think Andy understands that better than anyone, so I'm pretty positive about it.
There's lots of people online already saying, actually, why would devolution make anything any better? There's been lots of failures of devolution as well as successes. Talk to the sceptics now for me, Oliver, and explain why you think this approach might actually make life better for people living in South Yorkshire.
I think there's two answers to that question. The first one is simply that the proof of, for instance, Greater Manchester, where you've seen 3% growth over the last few years, whereas in the country at large you've seen 1.5%. In Rotherham, in South Yorkshire, you've seen 64% growth in productivity terms over the last 20 years, because we've essentially been able to take decisions closer to the people that they affect. So, look, I know my community better than someone 200 miles away in London. I know the challenges and the opportunities, and therefore I can solve those problems and grab those opportunities much more effectively. But secondly, there's something about people feeling as though the way in which they live, the streets that they walk, the pubs that they use, the shops that they shop in, are all used by the person who is representing them to government. The person that is leading that region lives the same life as them, on the same streets, in the same communities, faces the same challenges. That's a fundamentally different way of engaging in politics. I'm here every day. This is my home. I want this place to succeed. All the mayors are like that. And I think that changes how politics feels in place. If that person can fundamentally change the world in which you live, it's a different way of doing politics, and that's important too.
Andy Burnham said that he wanted the high streets of Britain to represent a kind of renaissance of the whole country, to be a shop, literally shop windows for the change that's going on. Again, what would that mean for Rotherham? What would that mean for your areas? And can you envisage it actually happening?
So anyone that lives in a place like South Yorkshire would tell you that not particularly necessarily the sort of high street of Rotherham town centre or Doncaster city centre necessarily. Sheffield and Barnsley in particular have seen a huge improvement in their public realm, particularly in the middle of town. But when you go to some of those suburban high streets, that's where you particularly feel the decline. I think it's where lots of people feel like they've lost their pubs, they've lost their local shops, they've lost the greengrocer or the butcher. And actually what people want to feel is a sense of well-being that extends outside of their front door into their local community. And I think Andy is talking not just about places like Greater Manchester, in the middle of Greater Manchester or Manchester city centre or the centre of Sheffield, but actually what are those places like, in my terms, places like Crooks or Addick or those sorts of places, what do they look like and actually feel like to the residents who live in or near them? And I think empowering people like me to invest in those communities, bring them back to life, potentially through things like changes to business rates, but a bunch of other things besides, could make those places feel fundamentally different to the places that people that grow up there, live there, and want to make their lives there.
Well, let's hope that's the case. One final area, we have a crisis in this country of young people, often with stress and mental health problems, never going into the workforce or staying out of the workforce. And that's a big challenge for the welfare bill, but it's a big challenge for the incoming Prime Minister as well. Now, he argues that to give the skills issue to local mayors and communities will get more young people into work. Why do you think that might happen?
So what we've seen in South Yorkshire is absolutely that challenge writ large. So 1 in 5 people in South Yorkshire are economically inactive, and you simply can't grow an economy when 1 in 5 people, 20% of your population, aren't working or contributing. And so what we need is a revolution in how that system works. Now, previous governments have done a very top-down approach, taken a very top-down approach, and essentially either told me exactly what I need to spend my money on and how and where, or worse than that, just come into my community and taking decisions on our behalf. Now, a system in which I'm able to spend money, focus our resources on the challenges that we have specifically in South Yorkshire, and they will be different in Liverpool City region or Newcastle or any other part of the country. I can tailor that approach to the challenges that we face here and the opportunities we have in the economy that we're growing here in South Yorkshire around things like advanced manufacturing. That is the way in which I think you make people realistically and really feel as though they are engaged in a system which is there to support them.
Oliver, psychologically, how will it feel if you're having those conversations about change with someone in Manchester rather than in London?
I think it'll feel quite different, actually. I mean, look, I'm someone from Yorkshire. We don't traditionally love the people over the other side of the Pennines, but quite frankly, we're all Northerners, right? So, like, from my perspective, I went over to Manchester earlier today. It took me best part of an hour. I got there, got back in a day, been able to come back to my office and do some work. It's a bit more difficult when you have to go down the road to London. You have to engage in a system which isn't always built for you. And actually, me being able to go over to Greater Manchester, a place which is much more similar to South Yorkshire than it is different, is actually something that I think psychologically changes how it feels to talk to people who, again, live in the same communities, work in the same places, absolutely understand those challenges that we face, changes how it feels to operate government in this country. And I think it is all for the good that we're thinking very differently about how to do politics, because let's be honest, politics hasn't been working for most people for some time now. Something's got to give. And Andy, I think, has given voice to that today.
A view from the White Rose side. Oliver Coppard, thank you very much indeed for that. Andy Burnham has promised to deliver the biggest post-war council housing programme since the Second World War. Is this the return to Labour's heritage the left's been asking for? Time now, 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
The imminent Prime Minister today told us he wants to empower local mayors and councils to spend more. But where's the money coming from?
Ian Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Iconic, yeah?
Very much so. I mean, I think we'll hear more in due course from Andy Burnham about how it pays for itself.
I hope so.
Well, because there's not been all that much detail, one would say, so far. But yes, you make a good point. Of course, we can go back to Keir Hardie, really, at the start of the 20th century. We can identify, like 1924, for instance, John Wheatley, who, as you will know, was one of the left...
The great Scottish socialist John Wheatley.
Yeah,
yes.
who was one of the few left-wingers in Ramsay MacDonald's first Labour government. He managed to get the Housing Act through in 1924, and the importance of that was suddenly Labour had this belief in itself that it could build hundreds of thousands of homes.
And you could argue that was the only really big achievement of that government.
It really was. I mean, it was a short-lived government, a minority government, but that was the big achievement. And in a sense, it gives it the belief, much later in 1945, many world events between, that housing can be central to Labour's offer. And the 1945 manifesto said, up in lights, the country wants food, work and homes.
I wonder if we're seeing here sort of the beginning of a fight being picked by Andy Burnham with the ghost of Margaret Thatcher, because it was Margaret Thatcher, with privatisation of council housing, selling off council houses, that began to really chip away at that sort of part of the Labour identity.
Yeah, I think what we've seen today is definitely that, and it's definitely Andy Burnham saying there will be a more muscular, active state, and he is going back to 79 and sort of saying, actually, the fabric that was undone in the years post 79 is around housing, and it is absolutely vital to put housing at the centre of what he is planning to do. That's my reading of it, anyway.
Douglas, the other thing I wanted to ask about, given your knowledge of Labour history, is I've read that Andy Burnham will be the first cooperative MP to be Prime Minister, and it's the Labour and Cooperative Party, and the co-op bit of that has been almost forgotten by many people, but I think you'd argue that it's pretty important.
It's hugely important. It goes back to around the period, I think, 1918, and clearly women's rights and suffrage were becoming a huge issue at the time. The fairly embryonic Labour movement identified that they had to bring in the growing cooperative movement because the votes of women were up for grabs, and other parties, the Liberals, I think in particular, really want to have those votes. So Labour has worked with the cooperative movement all the way through.
And that means doing things locally, doing things for yourselves in, lots of councils had their own, they council baths, council clothing, council this, council that, and that was a cooperative movement.
Yeah. And it speaks quite clearly again to Andy Burnham's sense of devolution and the localism and the cities needing to be powered up. And it even tips the hat to George Lansbury, a long-forgotten Labour leader in the 1930s.
You have looked at Labour leader after Labour leader after Labour leader. How radical, how much of a shift of tone do you see from Andy Burnham's speech today?
I think there is a huge shift of tone. I think we're dealing with a different kind of politician. We're dealing with someone who is light on their feet, who probably has a stronger sense and confidence of themselves as a politician. I felt Keir Starmer was beginning actually to grow into the role. I would think Andy Burnham doesn't need to do that because he has huge experience and the confidence of being the Manchester mayor. So it is a step change, Andrew, I think.
You never know what it's going to be like until you're under the actual spotlight and the intense pressure of being Prime Minister, but let's hope. Douglas Beattie, thank you very much indeed for that.
Pleasure.
Not the least of Andy Burnham's promises was that he would do politics differently. Less brutal whipping of MPs, more collaboration between partners, more partnership generally. As he said, problem solving, not point scoring, which is lovely. But is it possible in the tribal and cynical world of Westminster? John Crace is an author and has been the Guardian sketch writer for the past dozen years. John, great to have you on the show. You observe the tribalism day in, day out as you're looking down into the chamber. Do you think that Andy Burnham is being naive when he talks about a more collaborative politics?
Well, it's the kind of thing that you hear a lot from, a prime minister designate. It's on the wish list of everyone, really, because I think every politician knows that the tribalism is counterproductive. But, I would be astonished if, Kemi Badenoch's Tory party or Nigel Farage's reform were willing to collaborate that much. Anyway, Kemi has trouble collaborating with herself sometimes. So it's a worry. And I think the other thing is that, he comes in saying this is a 10-year project and, but the country in recent years has shown that they're only prepared to give a prime minister 2 years on the whole. So, you kind of feel he has to deliver something quite quickly here. And, I'm not quite sure whether, how he does it or whether yet again, we're sort of setting the bar so high that expectations are never
impossible. Yeah. And what about the other side of what he was saying, the notion of not whipping MPs? Because, again, there's nothing an MP hates more than the public perception of them as a kind of sheep that's pushed through a gate by the whips. And yet, if he's going to make big changes, particularly to things like welfare, he's going to have to make MPs vote his way, even if they don't terribly want to.
Again, it's the ideal is that MPs do it because they want to, not because they're told to. And I think here he has some advantage because he is inheriting Keir Starmer's large majority. Keir Starmer, I think, one of the mistakes he made was withdrawing the whip and suspending people who voted against him the whole time. Which is something Tony Blair never did.
You make an enemy for life every time.
Yes, exactly. And I think, with a majority of 160 or so at the moment, he can probably afford to lose. If there are 20 people disagreeing, they can disagree.
Final question, John. As somebody who observes the endless jousting week by week at Prime Minister's questions, that's one of the things that Andy Burnham's going to have to get good at very, very quickly. Any advice?
retain his sense of humour, I think, and not get rattled by it. I thought, at last week's PMQs, Kemi described him as a black T-shirt and some nice eyelashes. And he did a very smart little TikTok video of him batting his eyelashes at the camera, saying, actually, the T-shirt is dark blue. And I
more of that.
More of that kind of deflection.
All right, John, Grace, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news and videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks very much, Andrew. What a blessed relief it was that there was very little political news happening while I was on holiday, clearing out